Hello.
Hi.
Welcome back. So today we're talking about patriarchy again, but with a group of women this time.
Yeah, so our last one we kind of delved into maybe what problems men had with their own masculinity and how we can seek to evolve as humans and how we can maybe move the debate forward beyond the stage of being a debate, more into the stage of like
stopping pointing fingers and start making action.
And making more resilient communities out of that, because essentially we're all part of the same thing. And I suppose one of the interesting things from this one was that it was lovely to have Maura Niji, who's a Taoist practitioner and teacher, and she kind of brought us back to that idea that it wasn't like about because there was a little bit of chat that went towards like negative aspects of patriarchy, which absolutely have to be explored. But she was like, okay guys, yes, but there's also this residual feminine masculine energy that's inside all of us, and this actually teasing that out internally, as opposed to maybe repressing the aspects of ourselves that we're not willing to admit or we're not like proud to share, is actually maybe the way forward, so that we can understand ourselves better and then understand the people who are around us better. Yeah,
so when we're looking at equality, that we don't necessarily have to look externally to equality. We can look at like finding that balance within ourselves between masculine and feminine energies, and that will naturally transmit outwards. That's a nice way to look at it, isn't it? Because there's practical practices that you can do, ways to apply that aren't just kind of terrifyingly massive and kind of, we need to change the whole of society. It's like, how can we start that change at a base level?
It's like your Deepak Chopra moment. What was he saying? Like, we said about people like starting to meditate. If we change like 30% of the world to start to meditate, and then the whole world changes. But that's about internal practice. It's not about trying to browbeat your neighbour into raising their kids differently, or into attacking politicians who make statements where they use language that isn't allowed anymore. It's considered politically correct, or is maybe seen as being repressive of a certain sector of society. But it's about looking inwards, taking that, like understanding our own what hegemony we have inside our own minds and our hearts, and then transmitting that outwards. And also, as you were saying, not being like passive about that, like seeking out.
You have to actively seek. I think that's one of the things we learned, because we spoke to a broad section of women. We spoke to Moira, who's a Taoist practitioner and women's sexual health educator, and then we have a woman who's doing her PhD in porn.
That was amazing.
Which is pretty exciting. And we're definitely going to get her on again to talk more about porn.
Defo, yeah, that's important.
And its effects on society and ourselves. And then we have Aoife, who is the first member of the trans community to ever work in MasterCard.
Yeah, so she changed the whole global paradigm for MasterCard's employment and HR approach by being the first person. She's based in Dublin, in that office, and having to just think from scratch, how is a member of the trans community, how do we embrace them in our practical, setup in an office community, like in terms of what bathrooms do we have for them, all of this sort of stuff, which really hadn't been teased out at all before. And it's interesting to see that's really only happening now, even in very forward-thinking global brands.
Yeah, and then we had Shub, who is a medical student. She works a lot with marginalised areas of society and people that might be kind of pushed to the side or not looked on so favourably. And
she's engaged in in the kink society as well, kink kind of community and that part. And there's a lot of crossover there, I suppose, and a lot of things that happen within the kink community that might seem probably quite murky to people who are outside of it. Actually, it's interesting, because a lot of the exploration, like when she started talking about it, I started reflecting on it, maybe some of the things that she was talking about, those practices, are actually maybe quite helpful for us to, let go of our hang-ups around roles of men and women in society as transferred to the bedroom, basically, or as transferred to our sexual energy or sexual practices.
To the dungeon.
To the dungeon, exactly. Welcome to the dungeon.
But really, what it comes back down to is inclusivity, isn't it?
Exactly.
And all of those things, that we don't kind of point fingers at any one member of society and go like, "Ooh, that's weird. Ooh, we don't like that. Push that to the side." It's about going, okay, how can we embrace all these things? And where is equality? What is the meaning of equality, really? And we heard a nice thing this week about the masculine and feminine energies around research that we've been doing about a positive menstruation practice podcast and the training that I've done in that. And there's this old kind of prophecy that says when the women give their blood back to the earth, the men will come home from the fields and peace will reign.
Wow.
So the idea around that is that when we start giving our menstrual blood back to the earth, instead of taking it internally in sanitary pads or tampons and then throwing them away, the earth has this deep need for that blood to be returned back to itself in its own kind of archetype of a womb. And because we stopped doing that, because we started throwing the blood away and leaving those old rituals, that the men went off to war to create bloodshed. So blood would literally be shed on the ground and the earth would get that blood back into itself.
It's fascinating. It's pretty esoteric, but I think it's golly,
nice
as profound.
Metaphor.
It is a nice metaphor, and I think the things that you opened me up to, like about the red tents that I didn't even know existed, and this idea that women would have these rituals around menstruation where they would come together and there'd be a lot of, you know, sharing of wisdom that would happen during those times, and probably, like, I presume, a lot of emotional, you know, outpourings and people beginning to, like, having, like, compassionate moments with each other away from men. And then when that men saw that essentially was an access to something that they felt they were being robbed of, or that they were, you know, they were kind of being excluded from, they started to essentially disrupt that and to take that process away. So it's a really interesting thing that, yeah, that male energy seems to, this kind of, like, you know, what's happening in the world at the moment in terms of people wanting to insert themselves into other people's communities and change how they do things, and, you know, with this sort of idea that for the greater good, you know, we have the right ideas about how society should live. Nobody has the right ideas about society should live. So it's, yeah, a nice idea to have kind of compassion for those things, and maybe that will bring the men back from war. Who knows?
So enjoy our long rambling chat, and I hope you can figure out who is speaking when if you're not watching it, because there was quite a lot of us there, so you'll have to bear with that. Hopefully we negotiated it well enough. And thank you as always to our sponsors, to Clearlight Saunas, to New Zest, and to Swivel. All the codes will be in the footnotes, and if you want to know more about that stuff and you haven't listened to us on other podcasts, get in touch with us and we will tell you all about those fab things, because we're big fans.
Yeah, get discounts on those amazing things. Help to support us, please, just a little bit, so we can keep doing this. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Hey guys!
Hello!
Hiya, Finn and Lydia, back here as per usual, Monitored Wellness. We've got a little gang with us today, a crowd. Biggest crowd we've had, actually. We have all sorts of people who we're going to talk about today. This is the partner episode to our chat on the role of kind of modern masculinity. And I think we're just going to let everybody introduce themselves. So Caroline, do you want to go from you on? Great, lovely, thank you.
Hello, I'm Caroline West, and currently finishing up a PhD on porn and feminism, so yeah, that's kind of fun. I have other qualifications in sexuality, so any chance I get to talk about feminism and patriarchy and sex, I'm down for that. So yeah.
Great. My name is Moira Niji, and I'm a Taoist instructor, and part of what I teach is around sexual energy practices, and I also run a women's circle.
Hi there, my name is Aoife Martin, and I'm a trans woman and activist for trans rights.
Cool, you know us. So, I'm
I'm Shvangi, or Shub. I'm a medical research student and a medical student in general. I'm a creative, and I'm a general campaigner for, like, a lot of diversity and inclusion stuff in Irish platforming. And I too enjoy talking about sex. My parents will be so mad at me.
This is the one, parents, you should listen to.
Yeah, definitely.
So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming here today. It's kind of exciting to set up like a little women's circle.
What I think is a problem around sexual education for young people these days is that there's no narrative around pleasure. It's just around, don't get pregnant, don't get an STD, and that's it. And I think it's really missing something. I spoke to a friend of mine who grew up in Finland, and another friend who grew up in Sweden, and they were saying that their sex education is around, like, sex is really good for you, it's a really important thing for your body, you should have lots of sex, it'll make you feel great, it'll make your body feel great, here are the ways to do it that are going to be great, and here are the questions to be asking, like, does this feel nice for me? Do I like it this way? Who do I want to be doing this with? And yeah, what do I feel about my body? How can I explore my body? And I think that's really missing, because here, when I've talked to girls in schools, they're talking about their first sexual experience, and their first experience was, their takeaway from it was, how did I look? How did they think I look? And did I do a good job? And none of the
over and done with.
Yeah, there's no questions that are being asked about. Did I like it? Like, do I want to do that again? Totally, and that's from porn.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, porn
is it just from porn?
No, it's that existed long before porn was on the scene. Porn reflects society, you know, and you know, you see all that stuff in Hollywood as well. Passive females who get rescued by men all the time. So, you know, we're only now getting action figures, and that's like Laura Croft with gigantic boobs and hot pants. You know, it's problematic on many levels. But
that's an understatement.
It is. It's very performative, and you like see again. Go back to Cosmopolitan, like you know, if people are writing in going, he's going to look at my stretch marks or my belly, and then the advice is like, use different lighting and all this, rather than saying, fuck him, if he doesn't like your stretch marks, get someone else who doesn't mind them, it's fine. And also obviously very heteronormative language and stuff, and but just it's like as if the body is shameful, and like we're meant to be these perfect airbrushed creatures who have no scars or flaws, and we all have, like, obviously beauty ideals change over time. Now it's like tiny waist and a big ass, and thank you Kardashians for all that stuff. But yeah, very performative, and very little conversations about female orgasms, and you know, like multiple orgasms for women. Like that's, you know, why are we talking about this? How amazing is that women can come in like 15 different ways in, you know, 10 minutes or whatever it is, or it can come from your nipples, and it's like, we're fucking awesome, like, you know, and
jealous.
That's
Monstrously jealous.
Yeah, one in your club.
No wonder the patriarchy, because jealous.
That's underneath a lot of it. Jealousy and fear, and you know, that, especially, you know, with the fact that like biological women are the life givers and all the rest, so I think that's part of it as well. So fear a lot of the time.
It's funny, isn't it? There's so much of the life cycle that's born out of like feminine, sacred feminine aspects. Kind of understandably, not like, I'm not trying to like forgive anything, but that men would kind of be like, where's our part in the conversation? And then use the dominance, the physical dominance, to kind of take over that. So where do you think is the obvious insertion point? Excuse that's not. But for men in that conversation, do you know, like a valid and a useful insertion point?
I think it just like being calm and listening to women, and getting over the whole like men can't have emotions or can only have anger and rage, or just all these kind of negative emotions as well. And then looking at the spectrum of sexuality as well. I think men are also, women are obviously the slut most of the time. Men are meant to be the studs, and men are told they just have to like know what sex is magically. They're meant to be the experts because they're the active partner, and you're doing sex to someone, and they're meant to know all of this stuff. Whereas half the teenage guys especially are like, they have no clue. They have absolutely no clue. And then they're watching porn and they're like, okay, I have to like pound her like a jackhammer, and then she magically has an orgasm that way, and they're like, that's just not how that works. So just being vulnerable, I suppose, and just admitting they don't know everything. It's okay not to know everything. No one knows anything.
That's how you learn what you like, I find. There's like so much of like sexual education, both from an educational perspective, and I suppose for me, like the public health impacts that it has. It's like with the HPV scandal, obviously, and like people not vaccinating because of this, that, and the other. I mean, like, I don't have an HPV vaccination because of like the cultural dynamics of having that conversation when I moved to England, when it was available for me, and being like, you know, being so isolated from any conversations about sex. I was like, no, I'm asexual, it's never going to happen. My parents were like, yeah, well, she's never going to have sex before marriage, and no concern about the fact that the man could already have HPV at that point. Obviously with the presumption as well, but yeah. So it's like, from a public health perspective, it's incredibly dangerous to not have conversations about, like, I don't know, it feels strange to describe sex as an act, but it also feels equally wishy-washy to describe it as a journey. But then it's also like, I feel like it is though, and I think that's the conversation that we're not having. It's like the steps that unfold when you're in a position where you're comfortable with people and you express to each other what makes you feel good. It's like the thing you said about Cosmo. It's like I have several scars from like lots of years of self-injury. It's like every time, like even if I just wore like Laura Croft style shorts out in public, if I knew someone and I was talking to them when I was leaving a conversation, I'd be like, look, I'm really sorry about my scars. And it's like the things that people just don't notice when they're sort of more focused on that journey rather than like things that don't add or detract from it outside of what you get told in magazines. It's like, really, if you're having a good time with someone, probably, like, okay, maybe your decisions of whom you choose to have that time with vary on, you know, whether you buy into the Kim Kardashian aesthetic of modern beauty or whether you buy into heroin chic in the 90s. Like, every era has had its models, and I don't know how much to blame them or be like, well, you're playing the game. If you want to wear short shorts, fine. If you want to look that way, that's you capitalizing on ridiculous standards set on you. Every era has their models, but at the end of the day, if you feel good with someone.
Maura, I'm kind of interested in like how like Taoism, Eastern practices fit into this, because they clearly are much more evolved in terms of how, you know, women and men recognize their sexuality, what they actually do to maximize their pleasure, their understanding of the way women and men can come together or be individual about it, or whatever role that takes or whatever mode that takes. Like, can you speak a bit about like maybe how, what you know of the like Taoism or those kind of like the Eastern version of sexuality, like how different it is from that performative versus journey aspect, or has it like, where does it sit between those things?
Yeah, I think one thing that Taoism can really offer is actually they place a huge emphasis on the woman's pleasure. And I suppose with sex, they would view sex as really important for our health, our longevity, and also as our spiritual advancement. So it was never a moral issue. So like maybe 2,000 years ago to present day, so with Christianity, there's been like some frantic suppression of sexuality, and lots of other religions as well. But actually in Taoism, in China, they would have actually led very open, healthy sex lives. And it was seen as actually very important to kind of your health. This is like the roots of life. And it was very, very normal, very healthy to have sex. And so what they would have done is they would have focused a lot on female pleasure. And also from a male perspective, they would have focused on preventing ejaculation, because this will be seen as kind of wasting the seed or the jing. This is like the life essence. And for women, they would try and cultivate their life essence. So I suppose essentially they would have seen, it's kind of interesting, they would look at men and women's sexual energy differently. So we'd say that men's sexual energy is more like fire. So it's like quick to come to heat, but also quick to burn out. And then a woman's sexual energy is more like water. So it takes longer to come to the boil, but will keep that heat for longer. And so they would have used these kind of principles. So this is the kind of yin and yang. So we'd say like the yin is cool, it's slow, it's receptive, it's being, it's stillness. The man is very active, it's an outward expression, it's more fast, and very much about doing. And we can see that even in our genitalia, like the man is external, the woman internal. But interestingly, like the idea of sex, it was always about harmonizing the energy of the heart. And when it comes to the heart energy, actually, the women have yang energy in the heart. So actually women are very good at expressing their emotions. The emotions will come quickly as well. Like, for example, a woman might be crying 1 minute, 5 minutes later she's on stage giving a presentation, she could be nailing it. Like, and the guy's looking going, oh my God, that's crazy. Like, what is going on? Likewise, a man might be really aroused, and then 5 minutes later it's all kind of over and she's left a little confused going, what was that? So, and actually we say that a man's heart is very yin. So, and with that actually, it can actually take a man quite a lot to express his emotions and to really open up and to connect with that heart space as well. So first of all, it's about having the harmony of yin and yang within oneself, and then the harmony of coming together then as well. Now I'm talking in more of a kind of a classical male-female relationship, but in same-sex couples you usually tend to have one partner is more yang, the other more yin, so you can adapt to that kind of a scenario. But I think with it, it's really actually what it comes down to. They talk about this harmony of yin and yang, and that the opposites attract and they can harmonize each other. And even like the ultimate harmony of yin and yang is the coming together of the start of life. So it's one egg, one sperm, and that's this total harmony that can happen. So essentially, in the Taoist tradition, they would have observed the female sexual response and about it needing to take time, and the men would learn this. And so they had, I know there was one emperor, he was called Huang Ti, and he would have had 4 sexual advisors, 3 of them were women. So women were seen actually as being...
Everyone has this?
Yeah.
Sexual advisors?
Yes. So they would have 4 sexual advisors, 3 were women. Wow. So women were seen actually as being much more superior sexually because of their orgasmic potential as well, and also their understanding of sexuality. So they would have kind of really guided men in this. So there was a lot written about sexuality, and there was a huge emphasis put on the woman's sexual response. And the man was actually advised to please the woman and to take the time. So it was all about slowing down, take the time. And he in turn would benefit from that, because what happens is when both are sexually aroused, they actually exchange energy. So the woman will balance the man with her yin energy. The man will balance the woman with her or with his yang energy. So it was about kind of reaching a similar level of arousal, and then this kind of exchange of energy that can happen. And that was kind of seen as a spiritual advancement of it as well. Now, at some point later on, I think they called it the Han Dynasty. It was kind of about maybe 200 BCE. Patriarchy did start to come in at that point.
Interesting. I was going to ask you.
Yeah, so it did actually start to come in. And then they said for about 400 years that they managed, even though the structure of patriarchy was there, they managed to keep the core values. And then after about 400 years, it started to get even worse. And they actually viewed women as the enemy, because they could cause a man to ejaculate and lose his life force.
Wow, that's interesting.
So it became really polarized, and then, but eventually now it's kind of come back again. So they kind of got through that, but they managed to keep the original teachings have been kept. And that's, I know you guys would have interviewed Master Montauk Chia, and he's really the person who's kind of brought these teachings now to the West. And so they managed to kind of keep the original teachings and be able to share them with people. So essentially, in a kind of classical male-female relationship, like a woman can actually help a man to open his heart, and like a man with that yang energy can help a woman to open sexually as well. Okay. And sometimes, actually, sometimes like what I would, my experience, and from my experience of teaching women, is often that women feel the penetration happens too quickly and they may not be aroused enough, and then that can be maybe uncomfortable, and maybe they then have kind of a bad psychological reaction to that and a negative connotation around sex. But actually the idea would be to understand the female sexual response. But I would say that actually women need to really understand that about themselves as well, because I think a lot of women don't understand their own sexual response, and they may be even initiating penetration much earlier than they're actually ready. So it's not always just about, the man is, penetrating a woman too quickly. I would say that women really need to understand their own sexual response and to be really empowered in that, and I think when you understand it, you're more able to communicate that with a partner, and likewise, I think the heart thing is really interesting, because actually sometimes, men can actually feel attacked emotionally. If a woman is maybe coming in too quickly into his heart and asking too many questions and wants him to open up too much, and actually he really needs time to open up into that, and also needs to be held afterwards. If he does open up, he's actually in a very vulnerable space. He's in his yin space, and actually really needs to be held in that for some time afterwards. The same way that after a woman has an orgasm, she still wants to be held and, maybe caressed and stroked, whereas a man might not necessarily have the urge I suppose the intuition to give that. So it's kind of interesting, I think, like we talk a lot about sex, but actually we need to also talk about the emotional, the heart side of it as well. And that's often, I think particularly in the West, we just look at sex, we just box it off and say, but we're not actually able to understand the heart connection bit, and how actually men are vulnerable in that way too, So, and I think that's really important for kind of the harmony of the sexes as well.
Cool, which is ultimately what this podcast series is really about for us, is trying to reintroduce some semblance of harmony between it, like rather than a combative sort of state around it.
Yeah.
Eve, I'm really interested in talking to you about this as well, because I mean, I won't pretend to have any knowledge of what it's like to be in your body, to have your experience. I'd love to know, like in the origins of your early life, in your teenage years, and your early kind of sexual fumblings that we've all had, what did those things feel like you were in? Did you understand the kind of the heteronormative thing as it was happening? Were you very self-aware earlier on, or how did your what's become your trans identity kind of evolve from that, or did it evolve from that, or was your sexual experience part of that, or independent of it, or?
It was probably independent of it. I mean, what I'm hearing here is communication is key for a lot of this. It's like men need to talk to women need to talk to men. We need to try and understand each other a lot better. We need to not be embarrassed by talking, even talking about body parts, as we were earlier on. It's a vagina. What's wrong with saying the word vagina? We don't need nicknames for these things. But like I would have grown up, I think it was about 4 or 5 when I realised I was transgender. Obviously, communication, I didn't have the vocabulary for that, to express that. But I would have grown up as sort of in a heteronormative environment, in that, I was attracted to women. So I was seen as heterosexual. So because I was, socialised as a male, people assumed I was a boy. I pretended to be a boy. And, all my relationships were with women,
Right.
So... I remember, and again, I am the oldest person here, so I would have grown up in the 70s and 80s, Catholic Ireland. So I was given...
Nice open atmosphere, yeah?
Nice open atmosphere. I was given the talk when I was 12 years old, and was told that, and it was the Catholic version of the talk, which was, your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. I was actually literally told.
No.
And that masturbation was wrong, and... that didn't stop me, of course, but I think that rarely works. I think, I remember when I told my son, I said, look, it's okay to masturbate. There's nothing embarrassing about it, and it's fine. And he says, oh, did you masturbate when you were growing up? I says, oh God, yeah, all the time. So, I think we need to be open about these things. I think we need to not be embarrassed, to explore our bodies, to communicate with the people we're with. It's because there's this sort of pressure on men to perform in the bedroom, and to, you as you were saying, it can be a very vulnerable time, even for men. So all my sexual relationships would have been pre-transition. So I'll be honest and said I haven't been in a relationship since I transitioned. So I've no experience of being in a sexual relationship as a trans woman. I can only speak from what I did as a pre-transition, and it's a very vulnerable time for people, I think, and it can be embarrassing. We don't like talking about sex in this country. We don't like talking about kinks in this country. We don't like talking about what gives you pleasure, what would you like to do, or anything that's outside of sort of vanilla sex is sort of frowned upon, and people get embarrassed by it, and they don't want to talk about it. So I think
it's rebranded as the stocking stuff.
Right?
Which sounds kind of very normal, actually, when you describe it that way.
So I think we all need to be a bit more open with each other about these things, and not be embarrassed about it. I think, and that's a long conversation to be had in this country. I think we have a long way to go yet. I think we're getting better. I know there are a lot of sex positive parents out there. I know some of my friends are really sex positive and are not embarrassed to talk to their kids about sex. But we still live in a Catholic country, or our schools have a Catholic ethos. They do not talk about this stuff, and they will not talk. To them, sex is a function, and its function is to bring forth children, more Catholics for the country. It's we still have to move on from that, and talk about what gives us pleasure and what do we enjoy.
And in terms of education with your own, is it son or daughter? Sorry.
It was my son who was talking to.
Your son, okay, yeah. So, are they in school system in Dublin or?
No, they would be in Dundalk.
Okay, so. And are they seeing? Are you seeing them come home with any more positive of an attitude to sex education?
I believe I am. Yeah, I mean, when he talks to me about it, but it's when he wants to talk about it. Okay. So it would be he would be quite open. But only when he's ready to. I'm certainly not going to force it on him. I'm not going to say, tell me.
You're not going to sit him down.
Tell me what you learned in sex education today. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. No. So, but what I do is I leave myself open and say, look, you ever want to talk about anything? I'm here. I've spoken about consent. I drummed that into them. Consent. Whatever you want to do is fine as long as there is consent. Yeah. Always make sure there's consent. And that's another thing we don't talk about in this country. Yeah. And I think that's very much something that we all need to have that conversation.
And there's a lot of nuance around it. There's an awful lot of nuance, eh?
Like what is there a current definition around
consent should be freely given, mutual,
informed and continuous.
And free of like substances as well and stuff. Okay. And then you have some people who say like that sex workers can't consent because money is exchanged, so it's bought consent. So that's a whole argument within itself and stuff.
Because people use the FAST acronym, I think, with like transactional or something, which is
and a lot of sex is transactional, just in many different ways for affection and stuff. But with the consent stuff, it's amazing at the moment, because the first time consent classes in Ireland were brought in at Trinity, there was massive uproar and all these opinion pieces in the newspapers about how terrible this is, and they're telling us all men are rapists and all this kind of just horrific stuff, and it was awful. But this year I got to teach consent classes in DCU, and we had to turn away hundreds of students.
Interesting.
Amazing. And it wasn't just for the free pizza, because it was pizza everywhere. It was amazing. I got to teach 2 or 3 classes, and the gender divide was amazing. It was pretty much 50-50.
Cool.
And just like the conversations that people had, they really kind of understood what consent was. Now obviously, the people who are going to consent classes are already either have a little bit more of an understanding, or they might be a bit more switched on and stuff, so that's problematic in itself. But it's also too late as well at third level, to be teaching consent, because people are sexually active before that, and consent shouldn't necessarily just be taught in the relation of sex. Sex is about bodily autonomy and integrity, so you can teach that going back to primary school, it's all those. But it's very interesting at the moment that the current sex education bill before the Dáil at the moment will address consent, but there are politicians who are blocking it because they do not want consent taught to children, which is shocking given
what are their reasons?
Because it's talking about sex too early, is that correct? And outside wedlock, and
but
it's very painful.
College, I'd say it's like endemic in a lot of parties. It would feeling like Fianna Fáil, as awful as they are, they're very fiscally conservative. I wouldn't exactly say that worshipping the altar of capitalism makes you a good Catholic. I feel like the Healy race in the lads.
Go on, sorry.
But it's like, consent is weird though, because I think it was Maynooth or somewhere where they shut down the proposed introduction of some consent classes. They're just like, I think the idea was just, the people who want to go will probably know about it anyway, but you can't make anyone talk about how it's not okay to perpetrate things on other people, and how it's okay to find your own voice. And I think that was just bizarre. It's like you were talking earlier about like performing sex and how to perform in a sexual attitude. And I think because obviously I'm here now, but I grew up around the world, but in India, and my family are still very Indian. It's very strange because sex is the conversations we have in general, but more so in India, because we have Bollywood and our attitudes follow the hype and the exaggeration of that in our news and everything. Because we're so deeply dishonest and dishonest by omission, but deeply dishonest about sex and sexuality and interactions, every conversation that's had around it is a performance. It's not, this person was raped. Even here, this is the rape accuser. The accuser said this, whereas the alleged rapist, you know, wept silently in court. So much of this conversation isn't, and like that's what's kind of worrying about consent class. You can teach to the people who are willing to learn, but for so many cultures, there's this barrier. It's like, you know, you're not going to talk about kink when you can't even address just the fact that someone has a choice to make, and it's an active and mutual choice, not ideally to prevent a situation where, you know,
I think that's a wider conversation as well, like even looking at kink and stuff, like the fact, and what you were saying about silence, and that culture of silence where we don't, like everyone knows about consent, it's yes means yes, no means no, and that's the basic pure level, but obviously we see in society that's not the consent that's actually being rolled out there. There's a study released yesterday that's a quarter of 4,000 or 1,000 people said you don't have to ask consent in a long-term relationship every time, and sex within marriage is always consensual. And you're like,
here in Ireland,
it's in the UK, but those values are reflected here as well.
In India, that's a huge social problem. Like we actually have like political and like legislative issues around whether like sex and marriage is rape or not. I'm like, how exactly do you get to the point of, honey, I'm home? Well, on your knees. At like no point in that interaction is it like, hey.
But it was only, rape within marriage was only made illegal in 1991 in Ireland, which is not that long. And there's been like basically like 3 convictions since then, so that's really shocking. But just in relation to like kink stuff, like, you know, when you're exploring your sexuality and you're kind of trying to figure out what I like, do I like a bit of spanking, do I like a bit of kink, do I like all these things of the, you know, smorgasbord of sexuality and all these options that are available to us, if we don't have proper conversations about consent and about pleasure and, you know, in-depth stuff about yin and yang and all this kind of stuff, like then we're into abusive situations. And the kink scene in Ireland is quite massive, but it's also, a lot of it is quite abusive because abusive people can hide behind something like kink, you know. It's a massive problem.
I might dispute that, but that said, like I haven't very much engaged with it in like the last years. I've been absolutely wrecked from abuse outside of it. But it's like, like I know mostly about like the scene around the city, and I find very often that it's a really reassuring space, because I don't know, maybe it's just the spaces I've been in. It's like a lot of people who've been like stalwarts of the community for forever, and you know, they will, like a lot of the systems are like vouch-based systems, but then like I fully understand how that could equally be,
there's a lot,
you know, you're willing to prop up like there's no abuse here when you are not willing to recognize the abuse of your friends. Like it's something you see in the queer community in college a lot, and see it quite a lot in like when young people, like young queer people who are aware enough to understand identities because they've explored and like found where they are in it. I find the tension there quite problematic because you know, they have had some degree of exploration. They're now like, oh well, it's fine, I don't see a difference, there is like no ripples under the sea, this swan is gliding along perfectly fine. Meanwhile under the water they're going, by the way, it's abuser, we're just gonna soft block them on Twitter and that's gonna solve everything in real life.
But I think that links into performativity as well, and general wider society issues of abusive people are protected by communities, and abusive people in the kink scene organise events, and you know, that's problematic. But then you expand that out to wider society and we have things like 50 Shades of Grey, which is very abusive, and it's like such potential to be a great movie about kink, and yes, we should have movies about kink and it should be great, but that movie is just so bad. Like it's great for it opened up a dialogue, but then if you didn't have the critical thinking skills to look at that, you might go, oh,
this is what I'm meant to like.
As a woman or as a submissive, I'm meant to put up with all these behaviours that may or may not be abusive. Kink is not inherently abusive, but some people behind it, like in every factor, like you know, there's abusive people in every world. But then you see groups of feminists protesting outside 50 Shades of Grey, like movie premieres and stuff like that, and saying kink is abuse and BDSM is abuse. Like in the 70s and 80s, there was a hardcore group of feminists in the US that said strap-ons were abusive and replicating the patriarchy. And if you're a feminist who is into BDSM, good luck to you, because you're nothing more than an abuser. So that dialogue is there as well. So it's like, how do you navigate that if you don't have, like, you know, the critical thinking skills or the life experience or anything else?
And a very strong moral compass and a strong voice.
Yeah. Like, where do you find pleasure in that kind of world where you're told by men on one hand, this is one thing, you're told by feminists on another hand, this is another thing, and then you have to figure out your own path in the middle of it. It's very complicated. And that's why we have, like, everyone is really quite vulnerable, especially if you're trying to explore sexuality publicly as well, and, you know, just navigating those waters. And, you know, when you're new to a community as well, like, there are people whose little radars go up and be like, fresh meat coming in, no matter what community that is. And you see a lot in even like the woohoo, you know, like, sexuality community, what's the word I'm looking for?
Tantra.
There's so much abuse in Tantra as well. And, you know, a lot of men who are like, well, if you don't do this, you're not a true Tantra person. And that's in every situation. So that's violence is deadly in so many ways, you know.
It seems to me like the key thing that you were talking about in Taoism is the kind of key factor in changing that thing of when we're looking at sexuality, or we're looking at our own sexuality, when we move away from it being that purely mechanical pleasure-based thing and more into it being something that's on an energetic level and that it has this extra level to it. If you're able to tap into that thing and really have your own radar for, is this working for me, not just on a pleasure level, not just mechanically, but also energetically, and like having an idea of where is an endpoint that isn't just sexual penetration being an endpoint, but what is the reason around this, and why might this be a health-based practice, and really framing it as a health-based practice is a different kind of a thing, because if you have that moral compass of going, is this healthy, like, is this health giving, that gives you a different thing, doesn't it? It gives you a framework around it, that when you're navigating anything around kink or anything like that, you're still being able to come back to not just, is this pleasurable, because pleasure is funny, like you can get pleasure from pain, but not in a good way. You can have been trained from your own family situation and your growing up thing to think that your pleasure is coming from pain. If you have been in an abusive situation, or if you've had people abuse you who are telling you that they also love you, then that switch can get flipped really easily. And I think if you're coming back to, if everyone in school was being trained in those kind of Taoist ways, that maybe it would be a different thing. That maybe we would begin to then slowly be able to have the language, but also the experience, or just even the agency in ourselves to be able to go like, this is what is working for me.
And I think one thing that there's a big emphasis as well put on, like they would refer to it as solo cultivation. So working on your own sexual energy, your own sexual pleasure, and how you master, how you can direct sexual energy within your own body. So it's kind of like if you were playing tennis and you had like a doubles partner, you know, and you would play doubles, but then you would also play singles as well, just to improve your form and know what's good and things like that, and then come back and play your doubles and you're a better kind of doubles partner as well. So I think that part is really key as well, just knowing your own sexual response, and then like if you talked about communication, and that's when, if you know your own sexual response, you're in a better position then to communicate. You know, even if it's in a kink situation or whatever, that you're in a position that you can communicate what feels right for you as well. You know, so.
I just want to interject really quickly, like. Just on the thing you said about, you know, like some people take pleasure from pain, and like it can be like because of like your formation. Every person has a formation. I just want to have like a caveat of like, if you enjoy that, you enjoy that, and if that is what brings you emotional fulfillment, fine. And just because like everyone's kink is their own, and for some people it might be and it might not, but there's so much wrapped up in the performance of a kink, like wrapped up in the negotiations you have with someone in those kind of dynamics, that it's, if you then go down and going like, you know, but sex isn't this clean thing, it's messy and glorious, and it's enjoyed by people in very different ways anyway. So like just if it doesn't matter to you that that's why you enjoy it, or if that's something that you're actively like seeking closure with or whatever, then
it's just having awareness around that, isn't it? And clarity of clarity of understanding that you're not going into that flying blind.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I think a lot of like things that are deemed weird sex as well. Like I'm fascinated with objectum sexuality, so that's when you're sexually attracted to inanimate objects, like the woman who married the Eiffel Tower and stuff. I'm fascinated.
Wow.
Because I think that the process of that really fascinates me. Because number one, you have to name that to yourself. And you have to name, this is what I'm turned on by. This is my thing, and whether that's kink or whatever it is, and so. And then you have to act on it. So whether that's with a person or an Eiffel Tower or and then a lot of the times people talk about this publicly as well, so they'll talk to magazines or make documentaries about it and all this, and it's like at the risk of losing friends and family and jobs because society thinks this is weird. And it's fascinating the process people go on.
And the neurobiology around it. I've never thought about it, but I'm fascinated.
I think part of it is a connection to trauma, and a relationship with another human is kind of shut down because you're fearful of being hurt, I think. But I think that's a very simplistic explanation, but that's even like when people marry prisoners on death row, they're never going to come out, they're never going to come near them, so they have a relationship, but it's safe, even if the person's a mass murderer or something like that. But even things like, daddy little girl play and stuff like that really squicks a lot of people out, and there's, men who are dressed in diapers and all this kind of stuff. But again, like that might come from trauma or whatever that comes from, but if they're not hurting anyone and that's their thing and that's the level they're at and they don't want to or they can't be affording that, well then...
Like obviously in kink organised spaces, that would just be like, look, I'm here to facilitate. Like I remember being asked, like, are you sure you're okay? Things can get pretty weird. It's like, I have seen every bodily fluid come out of work that they really shouldn't, and those have been like actual medical things that have had me worried because I was not expecting that the first week of like placements. Like if so long as people are in the moment or generally like enjoying themselves, if someone looks like they're having a not good time, and there is, I don't want to call it an art, but there is an art to like knowing when someone is in pain, and it's like knowing when someone is in emotional pain or not having or like not having a good time related to it. It's like if I see that, then no, like I'm going over and being like, what, like firstly what can be done to facilitate, because sometimes it's just like an awkward position or something that they haven't really realized, but that's what's bugging them. But or just be like, no, look, there is someone here who is safe you can talk to. But yeah, it's like, it's none of my business. It's not my thing, but it's also not my business.
And do you think a lot of this, like, so this repression, well, do you think, can you speak to how a lot of that, when it does come out, solves problems for people in their outward life, in their like day-to-day non-sexual life?
Well, I certainly, like, there's very simple things that people enjoy. Like there will be people who will go to spaces who, they just kind of want to get hit. Just like want to take a nice flogging, relax the shoulders, and then be like, I actually just like feel very fulfilled now. And I'm like, can relate, good. Like some things are very simple, and actually it's a very unusual conversation I had with a person not too long ago. And they were like, yeah, look, this is like a situation they're describing. It's like, well, if like, I could be in this situation with someone, and I would do X thing that will go unnamed for confidentiality's sake. It's like, but it'll be fine because I will enjoy this, and it'll cause that person pain. And then like person was like, look, you can do that once, but I'm never coming back again, because I can ask for that and be okay with that in the moment, but I'm just as okay with the fact that I would never ever be around you again if that happens. So if you're willing to make that trade-off, fine. So it's just like, things can feel okay in the moment, and that is situational consent. You can be like, yeah, I'm consenting to be put in this position, but this is like what you need to know about the rest of how that situation's going to unfold, because that's how two parties give informed consent. So
that's an incredible level of self-awareness. That's impressive, isn't it? And it's so rare.
A lot of us don't get to that because sex education is so poor, and our knowledge of consent is so poor, and our knowledge of pleasure is so poor, because some people will be like, where is the pleasure in that? Because we don't have that dialogue, and we just, you're either a good Catholic girl or you're weird, or there's something like that. And again, I think that's patriarchy shutting all that down as well.
And certainly, like, if you go from that sphere into them just being like, well, I'm just dating, just like normal people, I guess by comparison and saying, oh, sweetie, what am I doing to you? No, it's like, I don't know, I suppose I've had exceedingly good fortune in that, like, partners have always been like, either been like, oh, it's a bit weird, or been like, no, I'll try and understand, give me time, and eventually I'll be like, that's what's happening. But yeah, it's like, sometimes it takes that one person to go and be like, well, this is what I'm into, or this is what I'm going to, like, maybe not all the dynamics you will have in your life will account for that, but that's true for a lot of things. Like, you enjoy golf, that doesn't mean, like, every conversation you have with every friend will involve golf. Certainly if anyone has a conversation with me about golf, I'm like,
checking out.
I don't know you anymore.
Weirdo.
It's like, no, so old. Just like, yeah, like that level of self-awareness you don't really get in conversations, but that's also because it's hard. Like, it's hard being someone in that position. It's like the stupid, like, underrepresented groups thing rehashed again. It's hard being someone who is like taken all the knocks to get to that understanding, and then be like, how do I explain this to you where it doesn't leave you requiring an intensive psychiatrist? Like,
I have to pick up your brain off the floor.
Yeah, pretty much. And sometimes people will come along for the journey, sometimes people won't. And yeah, it's like, sometimes that energy won't be worth expending. And then you don't do it. And you just need to realize which, like, don't like using which battles to pick. This is like the PETA me. Stop.
So in terms of, like, in terms of that patriarchal kind of aspect to this, like, what do you see? Like, we're in a very kind of unique situation here, and we've got people who are very open to expressing what they feel and what they want, and how they would like the world to look. When you step back out into the real world, like, how close are we to making significant change? And is it like, generations like your children, I don't know if anyone else here has children, but are going to be in a significantly different place, or are we still, or am I fooling myself saying that, like, the patriarchy is kind of crumbling at that level, or like where are we at?
I think we're on a cusp, I think, in society. The fact that, like, Ireland is horrendous for some things, but positive in a lot of things.
It's amazing, isn't it?
We passed same-sex marriage. We have the Gender Recognition Act now. Like,
Classic bag levy.
Yeah, so true.
Countries aren't even near that.
Because smoking. Yeah, we've done. Yeah.
But, like, even like in 2016, we had Emma Kenny say we need the national conversation on porn, and I was kind of involved in that because I was like, yes, I will have a conversation with you about porn. But most of the conversations were just appalling. It was just, porn's bad, it's going to ruin your kids, and that's pretty much it, And now... And
was that the agenda Emma Kenny and Fine Gael were setting? Or?
He launched that need for the conversation at a victim support helpline, and he said there's avalanches of porn coming in. So it's very inflammatory language as well. And a lot of the media ran with that, and the example I give is that there was someone on the Late Late Show, and I was in the audience ready to talk, and they ran out of time, and I was like, oh, I need to talk about this. But they were saying, someone who had very religious connections was saying that watching porn online is the same as getting PTSD from watching ISIS beheadings online. And you're like, whoa, there's so much to unpack there, and no one talks about pleasure, it's just fear and this terribleness. So I wrote a report on that and how we had the conversation about that. So I've been in the media in October, and the difference is astounding. Like, I'm getting half-hour conversations on, like, the Ray Darcy show, and we're talking about pleasure and parenting and how the parents help their kids talk about sex, and really, like, positive conversations where I've got to say the word orgasm on Irish radio quite a lot. And like, to advocate for, like, conversations that are pleasure, and to advocate for, like, the sex education bill as well. So to see that, and then also to see that, like, after, like, the Belfast rape trial, we shut down O'Connell Street and we said fucking enough is enough. And that was around the world. And then again, at the consent panel last night, Nolan made a good point of the rape trial with the thong that was used as evidence. She said if that had happened a couple of years ago, we wouldn't have had the same response to it, and it would have been like, again, it was her fault, she was wearing a thong, that myth would still be there. But the fact that we stood up and we were like, no, this is not happening, we're not taking this, that barrister is a horrible person for doing that, and that was the focus. It wasn't on the victim's behaviour, it was the focus on how dare that barrister do that. So we are at a much better place, and we are having these conversations, and the fact that the consent classes are being more received as well is a massive thing. We have the MA in sexuality studies in DCU for 7 years now. I'm doing a PhD in porn. Like, did not think that was ever going to be a thing. And it's just, there's so many more initiatives being set up. And like, you know, I put out that Twitter call for like to talk to sex educators of colour or trans people, and getting people coming back. And that's the thing as well. So it's more diverse. The Science Gallery has a 3-month-long exhibition on intimacy, where we're having conversations on sex and disability and consent and porn, and it's like, this is amazing. It's absolutely amazing to have. We have more workshops, and there's women's circles, and you know, we've more trans people being more visible in the media. You know, obviously that comes with its own challenges as well, as I'm sure you still know, but there's so much more to do, but we have achieved so much, and it's important to recognise how far we've come from a state of silence and Magdalene laundries and bishops talking about sex.
I think some of the dynamic has shifted as well, because I think, as like, you know, for me, when I only moved to England about 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago, and yeah, like the conversations that you have in India haven't really changed much, and a lot of like my family's cultural conversations are based around that, although like I think now they've just gotten to the point of looking at my Twitter being like, okay, log it off for the day. It's like, enough is enough. But like, I think the conversations from perspective of me as a person of colour, it's like, I think Ireland's starting to realise, because, you know, I'll drag them by the hair if I have to, that like, you know, you put a call out for people of colour, like people were shocked when the solicitor did, like the way the solicitor acted in the trial. And I'm really disappointed that I'm now known on Twitter because we were like really shitty underwear sketches. Like, they're not even good. Just like, it was just like line drawings. But yeah, it's like, you know, people were asking me, was it an interview with Dazed on the issues that have unfolded, and it was like talking to them about how minority groups feel that struggle much more. And the thing is, we feel it every day. It comes back to what you were saying earlier about, if you're a certain class, you were seen as a slut. And like, yeah, like for a lot of people who are middle class and white women, which is where the conversation is going, like, you know, they were shocked that another middle class white woman would do this. And it's like, yeah, no, we don't get to be empowered over our sexuality ever. We are always the slut. We are always the accuser who is always painted in a bad light. Like, if you were queer, if you're a migrant, I mentioned trans as distinct to this only because of like the general social like conversation about trans people from like privileged white feminism, because it's appalling. Like, we never get to do that claiming, and like we're very lucky that we have people like you who've been able to be like, I'm going to be a doctor of porn. I'm going to be a doctor of porn, and I like, honestly, what am I doing with my life, Caroline? I can also be a doctor of porn. Like,
hashtag goals.
Yeah. Like, we're lucky that we have people who have like gone to, I imagine, like considerable social upheaval to be like from the position you started out in, to be open about the work you do and take so much passion from it that, you know, you can then come back and be like, other people are having these conversations. But it's like, the shock that a lot of people felt was a very manufactured product of a very privileged feminism, like the kind that stands outside 50 Shades and goes, all kink is bad, because it's more about performing wokeness than
performing good sexuality.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, like clean sexuality, you know?
Yeah.
Not messy, glorious, fun stuff. Yeah, and like not something that should be available for everyone unless you have the money to, you know, get away with being a bit weird. But yeah, there's a certain like level of respectability, and respect is largely earned through money. Like, even we can say Ireland is as Catholic as we like, but it's largely earned through how much money you have and how you can afford to portray yourself.
I was just going to say, just with you know, with regards to patriarchy, and I think like there are kind of social structures in place that are very patriarchal, and with the, you know, the long influence of the church and stuff. But I think sometimes what I often think of it is like on a relational level, like how we can address patriarchy. So for example, as a woman, like your relationships with men in your family, or friends or colleagues, or, you know, the guy who serves you in the shop, like how does that play out, you know? and what can you do to address that, you know? And I actually think that's where the big shift comes when we look at it from like a relational level. Actually, interestingly, I remember I went into Woody's, it was last summer, to buy a saw, and the guy asked me, was it for an arts and crafts project?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, give me your arm. I'll show you the project.
and kept trying to sell me the cheaper one. I was like, no, but that one's better quality. It's only €5 extra. I want a good one, like, you know, and just kind of challenging people, you know, and sometimes, you know, maybe a friend has kind of maybe made a comment or done something in such a way that maybe is a little on the patriarchal side, but maybe they're not aware of it. So it's maybe also addressing that with kind of, you know, with respect and dignity and trying to bring them along, rather than, I think if we go in really angrily, I think it just creates more polarization. And I think it's really important because a lot of this is so subconscious, you know, and a lot of times people have maybe patriarchal attitudes or views that they're maybe not even aware of themselves, but so I think we can kind of look at it from that point of view. And actually traditionally, like way back, the Celtic way was very matriarchal, so you know, a lot of times I think we still have, on a relational level, it can be really quite good actually here, in some ways, that, you know, the kind of, so I think that can be a way to, you know, looking moving forward, how we can address it ourselves.
And can you speak to like patriarchy and how it's unconsciously taught in schools, or like in primary schools, or where that is at the moment, and like simple kind of fixes? Because the weirdest thing is that when we think, well, not the weirdest thing, but one of the aspects of it is that it's all largely, teachers in primary schools and secondary schools are largely women. It's one of the female dominant industries, but it's still hands down the same system to boys and girls equally. Like, is there a change in that that's kind of happening? Are there simple things that can be done to evolve that?
Like, what also, can I just add to that, what can we do? Obviously I have a son, he's 4. Like, what can we do as parents of this younger generation? What are the changes that we can be making in the home that can help to try and offset that?
I think, like, I work closely with a woman called Sarah Sparrow who runs the Talk Diary.
We had her on the podcast.
Oh yeah,
episode 8. Really,
yeah.
She's great.
I'm just like, I'm not really. And but she's obviously, you know, working to kind of address the fact that like parents don't know themselves, you know, because they were a product of terrible sex education and a very patriarchal system and a very white Catholic Irish system back in the day. So they're kind of having to unlearn all that ingrained, you know, nonsense. But I think the internalized patriarchy, you know, I don't know why we expect our teachers to know any different, because they're having their own struggles in learning as well. So I think kindness is at the root of it, and recognizing we're all trying to unlearn all of those things, and you know what we're taught, and especially we were taught shame, and we were taught stigma, and we were taught the correct way to have sex to be a good woman. And then obviously for men, they were thought like they, you know, it was all about like, you know, making babies in marriage, and that was kind of it and stuff. But I think to widen that kind of conversation and like expose our young people again to like just diversity and different thoughts and different experiences. And I think Tenny do work in schools as well and belong to, and you know, having all these public voices coming out and having a different conversation as well, but also kind of being kind to people and learning, like, you know, I think we had this conversation before, and I made some massive like horrendous statements about like I didn't understand the trans experience, and I was like, but you're socialized as male, so didn't have a female experience as such. And now I'm like, oh my god, that's like, no, that's just such a failure on every level of understanding and wokeness and everything else. But like, I suppose it's a way of being kind, and not everyone comes to the table with the perfect understanding, and people are coming from different experiences and different backgrounds, and some people never learn all that stuff.
Some people also never make it to the table.
Some people are afraid to ask.
Being a kid is when you learn, like, the only reason I know so many languages is because I learned them as a kid. Now I can't learn Irish, that's because no one will teach me. But like, it's not that hard when you're teaching kids then, just to teach them to use a kinder language. Like, friend of ours, like, their daughters like started socializing in school as female. It's like, kids are fucking like happy out, fine, nice dress, grand. It's not that hard for them to learn a kinder language. Like, when you're a child, like, I think it's between the ages of like 1 and 3. If you put like 8 different golden retrievers in front of the kid, they will be able to recognize each one of them, and they will be like have a personality in their head that they attribute to each of them. And now I'm like, I wouldn't be able to tell one person from another on the street. It's like kids do have an incredible capacity to learn and build empathetic understanding at a very early age, and it's absolutely worth like having those conversations if you feel empowered to do it, or if you can't, finding the people, like, you exist. Like, if someone wanted me to come talk to them, I would. There's experiences that obviously like everyone won't have, but using that time to give kids like a kinder language. It's like something I was saying yesterday, or the day before on Twitter. It's just like, people like patting everyone's backs, going like, political correctness is the best kind of kindness. I'm like, it's just civility. When did saying the objectively true thing and not putting the effort into being an asshat become such a valuable commodity that people are getting paid to write about it? That's just a dumb thing.
Yeah, I think it sort of behoves like people like us who actually stand up and speak out to be cognizant of the fact that not everybody gets it, not everybody understands the experience that we go through as individuals, and to be open to being asked questions, and it's difficult. It can be frustrating and it can be really irritating sometimes, and I'm not always the most patient with people when they ask me questions, and you sort of have to sort of figure out, well, is this person actually genuine, or are they trying to sort of catch me out on something that they can use?
Good faith, specifically fed to death.
Yeah, the whole sea lining thing, and you do pretty much learn quickly to sort of filter those guys out. So it's about, it's the reason I speak out is because I want to educate people. I want to make it easier for trans people to come after me, because, it's not easy. It wasn't easy growing up. It was very difficult in the Ireland of the 70s and 80s. But I think, like you're saying, we've come a long way in a short space of time. We've had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century, but here we are. I think we're getting there. I think we're a kinder society than we used to be. I think we're a much more open society. Obviously we still have an awful long way to go. And certainly in regards to trans rights, we're ahead of the curve, I think, compared to the UK and other. Let's not go there. And we're one of the top countries in the world. Okay, our healthcare system is terrible for trans people, but societally we are much more advanced than most other countries.
And in terms of healthcare, what's the failing? What's the
basically, there are 2 places in Ireland where you can get trans healthcare. One is in Loughlinstown. Right. There's a 25-month waiting list just to be seen. And when you're seen, you're referred to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist has to give you a diagnosis of gender dysphoria before you'll get medically treated. So before you get hormone treatment or before you get blockers,
Wow.
Like when I went to
anything on a medical record is...
It's crazy. Well, like when I went for my treatment, I was referred to a psychiatrist in St Patrick's Hospital, and I went there, and it was an hour-long session, and this guy asked me loads of really personal, intimate questions, and as he was asking me these questions, he was dictating the letter that he was writing to Loughlinstown about me while I'm sitting there listening, and he's going, and Aoife's wearing a short skirt and black tights, and she's overweight, and I'm fucking sitting here, it's just, it's really dehumanizing, it's really horrible, but that's the game you have to play. And I deliberately wore a skirt that day because if I don't wear a skirt, he will not take me seriously. He'll think I'm not trans because I'm not dressed in a feminine enough way,
Wow.
So
you amped it up.
You have to do, it's crazy, but you have to play the game, you have to jump through the hoops, because otherwise you don't get the treatment you need,
Gender and sexuality is a performance thing. People are just not content with letting anyone be.
It is that comes back though to our stuck ideas of what it is to be a woman and what it is to be a man, and that's kind of the heart of this conversation, really, isn't it? It's about kind of going, well, what is that? What is woman?
It's confusing.
Well, that's what to go back to sort of what Caroline was saying there about how trans women are sort of socialised as male. That's the big sort of turf thing where they say, well, you're not a woman because you've got all the benefits of being socialised as a male. And I'm going, well, you try living as a trans woman in a patriarchal society. You try fitting into that sort of narrow gender stereotype that they force you into against your will, and you do not want to be there. I mean, that's, all women have different experiences. None of us have the same. We have commonalities, but everybody has different experiences. Like, my experience as a trans woman is different to a person of colour who is a trans woman. Completely different, and I would never ever want to speak over them or about them. They have their own experiences, and much more horrific. Like, I have white privilege, I'm really, really lucky to live in a country that I live in, whereas in the US, the life expectancy is so low for trans women of colour. And
is it really?
Yeah, I mean, 35 is a general. Yeah, that's generally
because of
violence. Because a lot of them, and again, this is not anti-sex work, but a lot of them go into sex work because they can't get employment. In any other sort of industry, people will not hire trans women.
Wow. So and there are laws against that, though, right? But rarely enacted, sort of.
Rarely enacted. It's like generally, it's sort of the bigger companies are great, for, and they're because they want to be seen as diverse and inclusive. Whereas you look at a small, even here in Ireland, if you look at a small company that probably doesn't even have a HR department, an employee comes up and says, "Well, I'm trans and I want a transition." They're not going to know what to do. They're not going to know how to handle it.
Damn. And are there people who train that aspect for businesses to deal with, or is there?
Well, Tenny, I know Tenny do a lot of work around this area.
Who are Tenny? Sorry, I'm totally
Tenny is sort of Transgender Equality Network Ireland.
Okay.
And
cool.
they will go around and speak to employers and about best sort of policies.
Okay, great.
Like, I'm lucky. Like, I work for a large corporation. I transitioned 2 years ago, and I've been working for that company about 4 years at the time, and they had no trans policy in place when I transitioned. So I was the first person within that company to transition globally. So it's
wow,
and
that's a huge first.
It's huge, it's a huge first. So but somebody had to take that. Not that somebody had to take that step, but
somebody eventually.
Somebody was going to come along one day. It just happened to be me. And I took that step, and since then we've brought in a policy. Another person has transitioned in one of the US offices, and another one is in the process of transitioning. So, and that's only because I spoke out about it and I'm visible, and it I don't say I paved the path for people, but it's only by visibility and representation that people will actually listen, and they will they'll say, "Oh, it's okay to do this." It shouldn't be that big of a deal.
And in your previous work life before that, was that the first time that you'd really taken a new job as a trans woman? Was that?
No, I was already working.
Okay.
So I was 4 years there. When I told my HR manager, I want. Like, when I first joined that company, I had a beard. And so when I told...
to change my photo on the computer roster.
It's something I want to tell you. Like, I remember my first day back as Aoife, somebody came over and says, "I hear you've changed your name." But
that's just part of this.
So I mean, obviously my HR manager had never encountered this before, and we just got through it together. We sat down every week. We planned what we would do. Email changes, who we would tell,
cool.
badge changes, all those sort of little things that you have to think about.
Yeah. And was that a particularly good HR manager? Do you think
she was absolutely wonderful?
Just a bit of a gem.
She was brilliant, and so we met every week. And then on the day I came back as Aoife, she had arranged a bunch of flowers for me and saying welcome back, and acceptance matters to us here.
Rock and roll, jeepers, that's great. I mean, that's a path you want to carve. Somebody's doing it with you like that.
It was for MasterCard. I work for MasterCard, so I might as well give them the credit because they've been absolutely wonderful about it.
Absolutely. For everything else there is.
I'm
sure that joke's been made a million times. Sorry.
So I mean, it's been very, very positive, but I do realise that I have privilege. Like, I work for a global corporation where they're very good with diversity and inclusion, and it's part of their culture. But it's not like that for everybody. Even in Ireland, it's not like that for everybody. No, there are small companies. Exactly.
Platforming, because when I met with Tatler after the whole lack of representation, they had credit. They were very upfront. Like, we don't really know about your experience. The first thing I said, we can't really speak to your experience, which honestly, really good play, considering 2 days later TED were there like, we'll have white women talk about your experience, and people who aren't disabled and people who aren't queer talk about you, and it'll be fine. Come ask them questions about your identity. That were pretty honest. They're just like, look, I can't speak to your experience and I wouldn't want to, do you want to, like, you know, take control of this? And that has now evolved into me being like, well, might as well start the website because I want people of all backgrounds to be able to just like have a space where they can host their work and be like, if you want someone to talk to, we are here and we are visible and there is no excuse for not doing it. But that move is hard in, like, I never experienced something like that, like anywhere else in the world, where it's be like, you know, the adamant nature of pretending that discrimination doesn't happen, and like far from acceptance being like, your existence makes me feel like I'm worth less because of the color of my skin. And, you know, like I couldn't speak to your experiences at all, but it's like, if you come into any kind of environment already facing that kind of backlash, and that's just like general like social consensus, I guess, because that's the social consensus. Like the media shapes consensus, the media feeds it. That's the consensus the media feeds because it's easier, because everyone working in a newsroom or in a magazine is like 30-something rich and white. And that, like, you know, starts from the fundamental level of education access, free internships, whatever. But it's like, if you can't even talk about things professionally without being called over-emotional or nasty, then how are you going to talk about things like consent when you're being over-emotional and nasty? How are you going to talk about things like messy sex when you're being over-emotional and nasty? How are you going to talk about the fact that you deserve to, like, enjoy your life as much as, like, I still feel physical discomfort when I say something like enjoy my life, because there is so much discrimination that it is hard. It's like, I don't think in the last 3 years I've taken a single day off where I've been like, you know, there was that weekend I tried to like just have a weekend without my phone because my partner was like, you need time off, and I was like, a couple of hours for work. I don't think I've taken a single like half a day off ever when it's not been for work, because otherwise you're seen as lazy and nasty, and it's so hard to, cause it's like the one thing that I would say to people that you should do if you can, and it's not really to do with money, it's kind of just to do with things that make you feel happy. If something makes you feel happy, like, don't be frugal about it. It's hard to do when you're marginalized, and it's hard to do when you don't have the resources, but it's like, if sex makes you happy, like, really enjoy it. If writing makes you happy, really enjoy it. And if working makes you happy, or building more access for people makes you happy, then, like, give it your heart and really enjoy it, because we're so stuck in, like, a world where we're socialized to be frugal, because frugality is how you get ahead, or not expressing emotions is how you get ahead. And it's exhausting, and it's unhealthy, and it's like, that's the sort of nonsense that makes you feel like, oh yes, I'm a medical student, but I'm just like seriously fucking depressed. And it's like one of those conversations that we don't really have in our field a lot, but I've been quite lucky because I got to watch Adam Kay, and then I got to read Dr. Farrell's new book. Like a lot of the things that we run into in my profession, or like the profession I'm going to go into, are a lot of this image of, you know, the doctor as a receptacle for all your worries, for all your gross jiggly bits, and every time that, like, you come close to death and are now not, but you're also people, and you don't deserve to have to be that stoic all the time. And it's hard when you're underrepresented, because everything you have to do is be like strictly academic. Me doing this is insane. But yeah, everything you do is so academic, so bare bones, because you can't ask for anything, barely ask for the minimum. It's like, if you can do anything for yourself to fulfill your soul, it's to not be frugal with the things you love. And I think that just leads to you having higher standards for, like, how you expect to be treated in work, how you expect to be treated privately, how you express what you like. It's like, we have a long way to go yet, pals.
Yeah.
Long way to go yet. Because those things are still terrifying, and I imagine, like, you face barriers of class, or barriers of identity, and, like, being misidentified and misunderstood. That's harder in various different ways, but it needs to be done.
I guess it comes back to, like, if you're thinking about frugality, or you're talking about frugality, it's also like the key thing that we're saying here is, don't be frugal with your conversation. Like,
Don't be frugal in expressing yourself, and sort of, See, this is the thing. Look at me. I'm second guessing myself even now, being like, it sounds like it's too much time to take away, but it shouldn't be. You should kind of be able to, if that's something you feel okay with doing, you should be able to have a conversation, to take a second and be like, look, is this something I want? The most freeing thing I've done in the last month since like my really bad mental health break was just being like, I said no to 2 things in 1 week. I have not said no to any work things in the last like 4 years, but I said no to 2 things in 1 week, and I was just like, honestly, this is what I needed. This not doing, just being is what I needed. And that's
the yin.
It's yeah, I mean, clearly, because I am the most high-strung person most people know. But yeah, like, it's not being afraid to have that conversation with yourself, and then not being afraid to take it forward. And if other people aren't receptive of it, creating a space where they can be, so that someone else who's in your position or similar doesn't have to like go through that middle stop.
Do you think that that aspect, or the people's view of your lack of frugality towards self-care, whatever it is that reframed because you're marginal in terms of your skin color and stuff as well? Is that part of that?
What do you mean?
Well, are you saying that people's, I wasn't totally sure if I was picking you up right. Are you saying that like people's optics on you deciding to say no?
Absolutely. It's incredibly different, because I mean, you only have to look at like the whole conversation with Ted. It's like asking for equality framed as nasty backlash. Asking for equality, doing unpaid labor, to be like, hey guys, this is probably not okay. Like, I am willing to give my time, like, for free, just like anyone else's, but I'm willing to give time that I had planned so that you can have some, token of semblance of legitimacy and not false advertising your diversity. And then people being like, oh no, this is nasty backlash. Then the Irish Times covering the entire issue that unfolded, with no credit to any of the original sources, with a single word reframing everything I'd said in, I'd like to think, reasonably academic language. I feel like you were vaguely keeping up with it. Reframing all of it as just nasty backlash, and people get paid to write that.
Wow.
So
I didn't know about this, sorry.
Oh no, it's fine. It's weird, because that whole thing came at such a weird point. Like, my mental health's the lowest it had been in like 4 years, 6 really dark periods, about exactly a month and 2 days ago. And then this all happened, and it was this really weird break point of moving me from like complete like frugality and care of anything, because like I was seriously depressed. Like I was eating jelly cups, and that was all, like jelly cups and maybe a pot of plain unsalted pasta over 3 days, because I just didn't care about anything anymore. And that kind of drove me into caring, because I was like, there is no point apologizing for making a valid point in a well-reasoned way when I'm doing it for free anyway. What do I have to lose? And I can make access easier for other people. And to be honest, you know what? I want to be heard. I may not deserve to be heard, because lots of internalized racism and other discrimination, but I want to be heard, so that when there's inevitably a much better voice than mine, they don't have to do this work again.
Okay.
And it's like not having that holding back kind of drove me into not being frugal with myself in like the extreme way I was when I wasn't well.
Okay, yeah.
There's a conversation to have there though about the labour you have to take on as a person of colour to correct white people's bullshit.
No.
And the fact that like, there's a space for ignorance and not knowing. Maybe they didn't know that their panel wasn't diverse enough, even though it was just all white, but it's the apology that comes afterwards as well, and just like a case of like recognizing our white privilege and holding our hands up and saying, got it wrong, sorry, messed up.
It's not like sorry asterisk. Yeah, it's like, it's not like what can we do, and when people give you an option at their own cost, being like, also this idea that ignorance is validated by you not being paid. I was just like, we don't get paid for this event. It's like, if your interest for learning genuinely only goes up to the point where it's like fulfilling your desire for money, then like don't even bother trying to say that you're platforming any kind of activist conversation. Because like Dave yesterday was like, why aren't people rioting? And it's like, people who riot are people who have like the most skin in the game but the least resources, because the people who have the resources already just don't really look beyond that. And they're the same people who'll be like, we won't really learn unless, because we're not getting paid for this event. And then when I go to publications and I'm like, hey, I will sort this out, and it's like, yeah, I know you vaguely mentioned pay, and it's like, yeah, sounds about right. So yeah, it's just like the standard, you know, something I was saying with Tony and Echo Chamber, because like they put their heart and soul into running that cast. It's like the standard for content given away for free is so much higher, and the standard for content given away continuously is so much higher, because everyone's like, oh look, you tripped up there. It's like, no, I didn't, but you didn't say the things we wanted to. There you go.
That's different.
There you go now. It's like, whereas people, you know, write paid op-eds and just like, it's good enough for them to turn around and be like, oh yeah, just, you know, contact me via DM if you want to chat. And it's like, why should I have to make that move at all? You could have done that even to credit work before you accepted money from being the white person who was already being privileged enough to do the thing.
I think even
it's a good thing I like being a little brat. It's a good thing I like being a little brat, so otherwise just.
I think even like with this podcast as well, Lily, when you came to me and were like, you know, do you want to take part of it? And I was like, well, it's on, and you know, knowing yourself, you know, Beth, obviously we're all white women. I was like, can we just make this a bit more diverse? Because you're talking about what it's like to be a woman in Ireland, and it's like, yeah, and I had the you know, the diversity thing in mind, and the fact that you were like, yeah, okay, like you didn't just go, well, I don't know, like there's no barriers put in place there, and it's just recognizing, yeah, like when you know better, do better, and you know, put it out there, and like you could have turned around and went, well, no, actually, you know, we'll just keep it as it is and stuff, and that would have been problematic, but it's just that space at the table, and not being a dick when you're called out on your privilege and your maybe deliberate or indeliberate actions and stuff as well. Just recognizing like we're not all perfect, but just recognizing that privilege and just doing better.
It's kind of asking the questions, isn't it, as well? Because there's always like everyone has their different area of expertise that they might know about, and then their area of ignorance that they might not have, because we can't all be experts in all the things. So it's kind of just going, okay, well, what are the questions that need to be asked, and then who can we ask those questions of? And that thirst for knowledge, isn't it? And that thirst for openness. If we can bring that into, for me, it's about early education. That's where I see this going. You know, I see how can we get those consent classes coming into primary schools? You know, how can we get Taoist principles coming into primary schools? How can we get people talking about diverse experiences coming into primary schools? And then how can we as parents learn from those people, and that it's not just teaching the children, it's teaching us as parents, so that we can then bring that into our home. Because when you become a parent, it's very much like suddenly you have to be the expert of everything and you're really not. You know, you're just fumbling your way through, and hopefully you're reading stuff, and hopefully you're talking to people like Sarah Sproul or whoever. Luckily in my job that I get to ask these people questions and then try and bring it back into my home. But when you try to do it, there's always pitfalls. I'm sure you found they ask you a question and you're like, yeah, okay, got that one. And then they ask you the follow-up and you're like, oh, no, I haven't got that one yet, just wait a week. But it's about also being able to say at that moment, that's a really good question, I don't have an answer for that, let's see if we can find that out together. And I think that's for all of us to ask that, isn't it?
The way you're describing parenting now is almost like, that's almost like how we were talking about like the way men interact with sex earlier. It's like being sort of like, obviously, like, okay, with parents there is an actual child at stake, which I believe is something you actually have to have responsibility for. Like,
you heard.
All crying and screaming and vomiting parts of it until they're 18 or so. And I believe after that the vomiting gets right as bad, like with the alcohol again. But yeah, so obviously with parents it's a lot more at stake. But it almost sounds like the sort of dynamic we were discussing earlier about like how men almost feel like they, like for women, it's like, you know, coming in to perform for men, whereas men have like come in to perform for the sake of their own like credit and masculinity almost. It's like what we can like, kind of like, maybe it's useful to see, actually maybe it's more honest to see learning and teaching as like this energy giving and energy taking process, because like learning is like filling your heart, filling your mind with good things, and like no matter what opinion you take after you've had experiences, that's something that you have synthesized from building your knowledge. That is still better than you not having built that knowledge in the first place. But equally, I think like it's like obviously this is a space where, you know, I can have this conversation and kind of acknowledge that I had this conversation and it kind of stays here, then I go on to the next thing. Constant education, the way that minorities have to do them, like very willing to do them because the only platforms we really have are social media, and you know we can't really be called crazy because we quote tweet and do everything reliably. But it's like it is an energy giving process, and like it is fulfilling to teach people. Like I love teaching, I love doing science communication, I love teaching in like whatever aspects and letting people, like my whole life is about letting other people have the opportunities to do things they'd never thought of doing. That's why I'm setting up the website. But it gets to a point where it goes from being an energy giving thing to an energy draining thing. And that kind of happens when you realize that what you're saying isn't falling on deaf ears so much as like what you're saying will just become this epiphany that people somehow came to themselves. And that becomes draining because it's like, what is the value of me? Like, what is the value to me of me? What is the value to me of the fact that these are things that I spent, you know, years and an intensive psychiatrist's worth of time learning? It's like, spaces like this, it's like, okay, I just speak to my own experience, but I think this is really wholesome and lovely, and it's a privilege to be, it really is a privilege to be able to sit here and talk about a variety of experiences in a way that people like me don't get to. They take whatever part of my various intersectional parts that you like, but like people like me don't do things like this. And I think my parents will be very like, you shouldn't have done this.
I thought they were going to say they'll be very proud. Let's reframe that.
But yeah, so people like me don't get to do stuff like this, but we don't. And I think like this is very much an oddity for my life. And I only hope that the stuff that I do going forwards will allow more conversations like this to be had in the future. And that when people do learn from that, like, yes, ideally the way that value is attributed in our society is capitalistic. So if I can make my platform like paying for my contributors and stuff, that would be great. But the reason for having these conversations in this kind of context is so that, you know, if like journalists want quotes and stuff, they can turn around and be like, yes, this person said this, and these are the conversations that have happened since. It isn't too much to ask to be credited for the things you say or the perspectives you have, because there sure as hell isn't someone else who has the exact same experience. And a lot about like, whether it's something as intimate as sex, or if it's just consent in like work, if it's consent in medicine, if it's just like having a yes or no conversation about, you know, if you want to go get coffee or not. A lot of that has to do with how two people are feeling in the moment, how they're interacting, and like everyone's different. Everyone will want a different kind of coffee or a different kind of time or whatever. You will want your tepid water. That's one from...
It's like the whitest thing ever. It's like water, right?
And that's one from your experience. If we went along and we were like, oh yes, this generic love of tepid water, uncredited. It's bullshit, because they're not being honest about the experiences they've had and shared. So learning is it's very soul fulfilling when you feel like it's done right in teaching, like when you feel like you've helped someone else like form an opinion or take a skill that they can use and just being kinder. But it can be exhausting if it's either falling on deaf ears or clearly falling on deaf ears and then being exploited. But yeah, things need to get better. We should just make all kids be like cute and useful and be like cute and useful.
Cute and useful.
Well, that's just my aesthetic, I guess. Cute and useful, and just be like, do better. Or maybe don't even tell them that the world is bad. Like, don't even be like, you know, like gender is a thing or whatever. Just be like, just go socialize yourself. And
it's a good point, because even I often think about belief system, you know, and you know, Nelson Mandela, when what he said about his time in jail was, he said, I went on a really long holiday for 27 years, and then as he came out, as he walked through the gates, he said that he knew at that point he had to let go of resentment and hatred, or he would still be imprisoned. So I just think in the context, the most oppressed people are people who believe they're oppressed as well. So like our belief system can also sometimes play a role. And like to me, he's such an inspiration. And he would have learned the Afrikaans language so that he could understand the mindset when he was in prison. They used to refer to Robben Island as the university behind bars, and people did a lot of study there. But he's such an inspiration to me. I'm just really inspired by that, you know, how he just could change his viewpoint on.
Yeah, it's the same with Brian Keenan, you know, an Evil Cradling.
Yes.
We were talking about this yesterday, and how he was in like held in captivity in Beirut for something like 14 years, something astounding. And I remember reading an Evil Cradling when I was, to be honest, probably far too young for it, but I was just absolutely, I still remembered like the overwhelming feeling of like he could find a tiny bit of joy in every day, no matter if he was being beaten for like 18 out of 24 hours. If he was like, it was somebody where he'd see one of the guards who kind of bullied another one, and he'd sort of like take sides and kind of have a joke about the bullying guard with the non-bullying guard in between beatings, in the 3-day gap of having no food, not even that slight bit of bread. It's just amazing, isn't it, what the human spirit is kind of we all have that ability to do it, but finding your route to that, like that's why Nelson Mandela is so inspiring, because like he's just a human. He's not a different like actual species. So we all have that like that ability to see the other side of the fence and to find the kind of the joy in those tiny windows, no matter how tiny they are.
And I think and it just comes down to compassion as well, isn't it? Even in this conversation, that what was so interesting for us was that seeing that the men and women's roles in the media were getting kind of polarized, and there were these experiences that from talking to the men, we found that, you know, there's patriarchy and its effects on women, but there's all these effects on men as well, and there's this mental health crisis, and there's all this stuff, that this socialization that's very, very narrow, you know, definitely, you know, we have these ideas of men and women and these stereotypes, and they've affected all of us. And it's not okay for us just to point fingers and go like, men are the problem here. It's like, where can we find the compassion for their experience and our experience, and then how can we now turn that compassion into that thing of going, okay, well, we've all made mistakes, and maybe some people have made more mistakes and some people have made less, but how can we move on and have this conversation in a way that's productive for the next generations, rather than harking back to the stuff that's happened. We need to learn from that stuff that's happened. That's absolutely valid, and it's great to talk about it, but now like, what are the conversations going forward that need to be had? And that's what interests me, really.
I quite like the idea of compassion. It's like something that we talk about mental health in the medical profession. It certainly translates. It's like, do we value resilience or not? I remember a couple of years after I left, like came out of school and moved here, and you know, there's a huge article that everyone's saying, oh yeah, you know, this is like the best state school in the country for however many years in a row, and every quote from like the headmistress or whatever was like, yes, we love inculcating resilience in our people. And it's like, yeah, well, we have the highest rates of self-harm in any school in the country. Two of my friends who are trans died in and around school. I think at least 3 more people I know from my school have killed themselves since. Maybe more that I don't know about. It's just like, I really like the idea of compassion as a result. Like, I do take the points about, like, you know, people who are inspirations who can sort of leave their shit behind them and go, and while admirable, I don't think that they are most certainly exceptions to prove any rule, unless the rule you're going by is incarceration as an analogy for the general state of human suffering. I think a lot of us, like, and I say a lot because people who are minorities in Western countries are by and large the majority of the world's population. A lot of us, like, we don't, you know, get beaten all the time, and I imagine some of us enjoy it. But a lot of us do every day get ground down. A lot of us do, like, just go to a shop to buy something and then, like, get grabbed by our name tags and be like, you have a funny fucking name. A lot of us do experience those small things, and I really like the idea that maybe we can move forward in a world where there is more compassion and maybe less of a focus on resilience, like less of a focus on like folks like Carrie Kay going like, you know, oh, like, you know, I doubt I'd be too happy if I was in that position, but sure, you know, ethnic minorities are just used to the oppression. People who are underrepresented are just used to it. We could move beyond that and like learn from the sake of fundamental human compassion. Kind of letting our resentment go when we're like, okay, well, there is someone reaching out some kind of hand. They might not be a perfect alternative, but you won't know till you try and engage with that. And equally, like certainly for like some of the people who had conversations with the Tabler stuff and the TED stuff, it's like, you know, kind of letting go of this idea that you might not even have noticed that you've internalized that, you know, a white person won't now be made to feel less for the color of my skin because someone else would also like to join and inform your views rather than being, you know, like holding actually learning over being, you know, able to say, well, I say I'm not a racist, or I say I'm not. I say my information is the be all and end all, and therefore it is. It's like, yeah, just want people to be kind.
Yeah,
like,
so
I just
true.
need some head pats.
Yeah.
Kindness. And you know, we all like kind of want to be, like at the end of the day, we kind of want to be able to wake up not on the wrong side of the bed, go to bed and just for a couple of hours leave all of the world behind us, and if we're lucky, like be around some of the people we like or talk to them when we can. Fundamental needs aren't really that different. Just recognize that sometimes when like a conversation just gets that little bit too heated.
Yeah. Great point to end on. Compassion, love and compassion. I was kind of hoping for that. That's something weird came into my head before.
No more frugality here. It's all good vibes, people.
Guys, thank you so much for coming.
An absolute treat.
Thank you for having the conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you for this gorgeous spread.
If people want to find you, Caroline, how can they do that?
I'm on Twitter, CarolineWest_IE, or email caroline.west2@mail.dcu.ie, and hopefully in the next few weeks I shall have a website or two of sorts.
Will you send it to us when you do, and then we'll
Post
look
that in
at
the
it?
notes.
Perfect. Yeah.
And Moira?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, universaltau.ie.
And then you do workshops and stuff?
Yes, I have workshops and regular classes and
Women's circles?
Yeah, women's circles as well. So the women's circle is called Yin Wei.
Cool.
And Aoife?
I'm on Twitter at Aoife MRTN because I used up all the vowels in my first name. So and I've written some stuff for Head Stuff, so just Google my name, you can find me on the Head Stuff as well.
Head Stuff.
Yeah.
Great.
And I will hope to be getting some contributions from you maybe for the new website.
Absolutely.
If you want to talk. So yeah, I'm on Twitter at Repealist. So REPEALIST _. The underscore is very important because the person I asked for the original one just refused to give it to me. And yeah, so if you want to talk to me about SciComm stuff, I'll be at the SciComm conference in Ballsbridge on Wednesday. I'll also be launching Repealist.ie, which is a platform for just any kind of diverse contributions, and it does mean like diverse from anything, from like the most privileged white women to like people without. It's just a place for exploring sort of multicultural and like different background experiences on both science and society. And yeah, like I'm doing a contributor call, so keep an eye out on my Twitter. And yeah, if you see me around, like I always need a hug. Like don't hug me from behind, because I will probably hit you.
Hashtag consent, yeah.
Just don't hug me from behind, but if you see me around town, I always need head pats or a hug.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a million for taking part, and thank you guys for watching, and please like and subscribe and post your comments, and we'll put all of those details in show notes so you can get hold of all these lovely people and yeah, learn more and keep this conversation going, please.
If you have any questions for anyone also, you can put them in the comments and then we'll pass them on. So thank you for listening.
Bye.
So welcome back, Finn and Lydia here.
Hello.
From Wandering into Wellness. I thought it would be interesting, since we were talking about protein powder and how that supports our muscles and helps us in our exercise, and that I would challenge Finn to a wall squat.
Okay. Wall squat off. So let's hope the wall squat off works, because we got our news test today.
We have
had a news test. So it's like
news test in this morning.
modern day ready rec. It is fuel for the muscles, and you guys can go to newsdesk.co.uk and you can use the code wellness15, which is our coupon code, a very special little coupon code. So you get 15% discount on all Newsdesk products, which we are big fans of. We don't really support any other kind of companies in this sort of way. We're not supported by any of the companies in this way, but we're really, really keen on NewsEst. And
we're just like nerdy big fans, really, aren't we?
We're big nerdy big fans. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
We want to spread the NewsEst word. So we are going to do a wool spot off and see who lasts the longest. I feel like I'm at a disadvantage because I've already took 2 classes today and just done a big, massive exercise
this morning. I know it was
did a workout like 7 million hours ago. But
and
anyway,
cycled twice
today. It's a fair contest. It's a fair contest. Let's go.
So if I fail, I'm like doubly failing. This hurts. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to set the clock here.
Backs against the wall. Well, I mean, everyone will just see who fails. Really,
excuse my language.
Backs against the wall. Slide down. So your bum needs to be parallel to your knees. There we go. So Finn, whilst we're in this wool squat, I think I will challenge you to finding some interesting things to say about the letters of NewsEst. So tell us some facts about NewsEst, beginning with N. N is for?
N is for not the protein you'd imagined. Whey protein is the obvious one, but this one is a European golden pea.
U.
U is for ugly, not us. We are all we're based on the beauty of vegan protein, and ugly is animal agriculture that's intensive rearing, and this is not an ugly product. This is a product that is like clean inside and
out. Z.
Z's an evil one, eh? Z is for all the zeal you can muster out of a day. NewsEst has got like a squillion health ambassadors. Top tennis players, top rugby players. Oh, Finn's slipping. They've got like all the New Zealand rugby team on it, like Mananu and all these sorts of amazing guys, and that is because it makes you perform. It's not because they're paid by it. They literally don't get paid anything by NewsEst.
No, that's super cool, isn't it? E.
E is for goddamn ethics. Ethics in a company. So when NewsEst approached Dr. Robert Kirk of the Alliance for Natural Health 3 years ago to produce a multivitamin, he said no, because you'll make me compromise on my ethics, you'll make me compromise on my standards. And so they said, okay, well, what if we don't make you compromise? He said, like, okay, well, give it a shot. And so he gave it one shot, and they have a product called Good Green Stuff, which is what Robert Kirk says is the ultimate in terms of nutritional everyday needs for 99% of all the audience. Go on.
S.
S. S is for sweating. If you're a fan of sweating, then NewsEst helps your muscles recover big time. So you've got leucine, arginine, valine, isoleucine, all the ones that are really key amino acids for growth hormone.
T.
T is for teetering on the brink of failure.
But yet, luckily, we took our NewsEst, and so we're just
going to make it through. Yay!
Yay, we did it.
Like, we haven't failed yet.
No. How much longer do you reckon you've got? I'm reaching, we're shaking.
I'm reaching, shaking as well. I'm like, where is it hurting most?
Quads.
Yeah, but where in the quads? The front of them? The middle of them? Yeah, ditto. Oh, it's burning more than shaking though.
So bad. So we probably finished.
Okay. One of us has to fail.
Remember our code. Holy. Remember our code. Wellness 15.
Wellness 15. Use that code at UK.
Go.
Best of luck. I win. Yay!